Good evening and welcome back to Sunday Evening Devotions in our journey through the Bible. Tonight I have with me an older snow globe. It's not for the snow so much, but you can see the water line as the water is evaporating slowly from this older globe, and it just barely covers the top of that church's steeple. That reminds me of our story tonight, that God uses flood and water to save his people. It's about God's grace. Grace to Noah. And what seems to be merely a judgment is really God's means of saving humanity and keeping his promise. Now, we had left Seth's descendants prospering as a faithful line of people worshiping God, separated from Cain's descendants that were faithless. And Seth's line was faithful for many generations, and some were even exemplary, like Enoch. But they didn't stay that way. They seemed to become envious of Cain's progress and his descendants' prosperity, and as well they were desiring the beautiful daughters that were born to Cain and his descendants as well. And so the line of the faithful intermingled with the line of the faithless by marriage, and they became corrupt. And the pursuit of power by violence was the rule of the day. And God saw that the heart of humanity was evil continually. So God determined to destroy mankind that had corrupted itself and his creation. But one man, Noah, the head of Seth's line, found grace in God's eyes. And so he had been born with the hope of saving humanity, and God would use him to do that, but he wouldn't be that promised son. So God determined to cleanse his world by sending a great flood. And Noah was called by God to build an ark to save his family, his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their families, and 2 of every kind of animal and bird, and 7 of the clean animals and birds, and bring them into the ark for a new world. So Noah built the ark, and he preached to the people while he built it. But their hearts were not softened. They were hardened against the Lord. And so God sent the animals to Noah, and he and his family, along with the animals, entered the ark. And God opened the heavens and the earth, and the waters poured, and the floods came. You may remember pictures of the tsunami that hit Japan some years ago. You might want to look at that and think of the power of water destroying all kinds of things. And so 40 days it did that. And everything on the face of the earth died, except those who were in the ark with Noah, while the flood covered to the very highest tops of the mountains for 5 months. But God protected Noah and his family and the animals in the ark, and he remembered them. And so finally the waters began to recede, and the ark rested on Mount Ararat. And Noah and those with him, though, would have to wait another 6 months before they could actually leave the ark and get back on solid ground. I'm sure they were anxious to be on solid ground again, but they would have to wait until everything was dry and prepared for them. And I'm sure it would be a lonely place, because God had destroyed everything that was living except the ones that were with Noah in one stroke of the flood. And so God sent out the messengers of the raven and the dove several times until finally they didn't return to him, because there were green plants and growth upon the vastly changed world that we now know today. Now the first thing that Noah did as the head of the line of Seth, the faithful line, as he entered into the new world from exiting from the ark, was to build an altar and to offer a sacrifice and worship the Lord his God, who had saved them and preserved them through the flood. And Noah was a picture of Jesus, who would come as the head of the line of the faithful, the greater second Adam, who would offer a sacrifice. But the sacrifice would be of himself, and he would save his people from their sins. And so God remembered his covenant promise, and he made a promise never again to destroy the earth by flood waters, and he promised that the seasons would continue, and he promised that Noah and his family would be fruitful and multiply. He gave them meat to eat and to meet the demands of a new world order that God had established, and the rule to protect human life. It was all sealed with a covenant promise the sign of the covenant, the rainbow that we see even today when the sun shines, when it rains. And all this Noahic covenant, as we call it, is a further revelation, an opening up of God's covenant of grace, because God was keeping his promise of a promised seed. So Noah became a farmer, and he planted a vineyard and many other things. He made wine after harvesting his grapes, and he unfortunately gave into his passions, and he became drunk, and he humiliated himself by laying naked in his tent without shame. Noah's younger son Ham found his father Noah lying in his tent, drunk and naked, and he had no compassion on his father, and he scoffed at him. You know, we often fail to see our parents as struggling sinners, and we make fun of them when they sin. That's sin too. So Ham laughed at his father, and he laughed at his father's faith, and he had no fear of God as he told his brothers all about what Noah had done, and seemed to take pleasure in Noah's humiliation. Noah's other sons, Ham's brothers, Shem and Japheth, they, with their backs turned, covered their father's nakedness and his shame with respect to God and to Noah's faith. And so Christ's Spirit again spoke through Noah as a prophet and a judge, and he judged Ham, and particularly his oldest son Canaan, who probably enjoyed the story. And Canaan was promised to be a slave, and his descendants would be slaves to other peoples until they were destroyed by them. Noah prophesied about his older sons, Shem and Japheth, that Shem would have a special relationship with the Lord God, as we shall see as the Bible story continues, and that Japheth would be blessed as well and enjoy in the blessing with Shem. So the future of the world will be governed by God's blessing. Well, sometimes it doesn't seem that way, does it? It looks like wickedness is going to prevail. But God intervenes, as he did in Noah's day. And because of God's promise through Noah, one day Christ would come and bring victory against sin and Satan. No more floodwaters to cover the earth, but Christ would come. That's good news. Good night.